Okay, Dr. Carl Hart, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you on. And I figured I'd try to give you a little intro before we got into it, if that's okay.
It's fine.
All right, so today we have Dr. Carl Hart. You are a psychologist, neuroscientist, and researcher at Columbia University. Dr. Hart is well known for his research on drug abuse, drug addiction, and advocacy for the legalization of recreational drugs. Dr. Hart is also the author of 2 books for the general public, High Price and Drug Use for Grownups, which I have right here, which is an awesome book. I really appreciate your insight here. And so I'm excited to cover some misconceptions that we have about drugs.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to start with just like, what is fentanyl? Because we hear about it a lot, and I don't even know if I really know what it is.
I'm sorry, you were saying you don't know really what fentanyl is? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I know it's an opioid. I've heard we are currently in the midst of a fentanyl crisis, and I just wanted to maybe start by laying the groundwork of what is fentanyl.
Well, fentanyl is an opioid. First of all, so an opioid is, we think of these drugs that come from the opium poppy. And there are 3 drugs that come specifically from the opium poppy: opium, morphine, codeine. When you make compounds that are like those compounds, synthetic compounds that are like those compounds, fentanyl is one, heroin is one, oxycodone is another, and these compounds are primarily used to help people deal with pain. But they're also used for other reasons in medicine. For example, if somebody has dysentery where they have a serious bout of diarrhea, you might want to give an opioid to help people to stop the diarrhea and save their life in some cases. So fentanyl is in that class of drugs. Fentanyl is one of the more potent opioids. That is, the amount that's required to produce the effect is smaller, very low with fentanyl compared to something like morphine. So we say it's more potent. It takes less of it to have an effect.
So what makes it different from other opioids? Is it just the quantity?
Nothing. I mean, yeah, the potency, that's the main thing that people talk about. It just takes a lot less of it to have an effect. If you think about a drug like LSD, that's even more potent. It takes even smaller amounts of LSD to have an effect. So that's all potency means, the amount that's required to have an effect.
I keep hearing that we're in the midst of an opioid crisis, particularly fentanyl. I just looked at the latest statistics. In 2023, we had 75,000 fentanyl deaths in America. Are those numbers telling us an accurate story, or what are we misunderstanding here?
Yeah, you said 23, we had about 75,000 fentanyl deaths. That's not what those numbers say. That's what people read the numbers to say. The numbers say that there have been, say, 75,000 fentanyl-involved overdose deaths. What we don't know is that whether or not fentanyl actually contributed to the death, caused the death. We don't know what role fentanyl played. All we know is that someone wrote on the death certificate that fentanyl was in the person's body, or suspected of being in the person's body when they died. What we know is that most of these overdoses that involve drugs have multiple drugs. And for each of the drugs in that person's body, it's counted in a single drugs category. So if a person's body contains fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, that would be considered a cocaine death, a methamphetamine death, a fentanyl death. Without us working out whether any of those drugs contributed to the death, or which one or which combination. And so when you cite those data, those data don't say what people say they say. That's why when you look at the data, they say drug involved. It doesn't say that the drug caused the overdose, because we don't take the time to suss that out in most of these cases.
But is fentanyl something that is very dangerous?
Driving an automobile is very dangerous. And so I think your question is can people die of fentanyl? Yeah, people can die of most of the drugs that we take, but you take them in amounts that won't kill you. And fentanyl is a prescribed medication. We treat pain with fentanyl, particularly people who have chronic pain. They may be prescribed fentanyl. And we've been prescribing fentanyl in the U.S. for more than 50 years, safely. And so I don't think fentanyl itself is the problem. The problem is that when we think about illicit drug use, they can be contaminated with a wide range of substances in which the person who takes the drug does not know. And so we haven't worked out what substances, combinations of substances might be more deadly versus the others. Instead, it's just easier to say fentanyl is so potent, fentanyl is the causal agent, fentanyl is killing people. And we forget about this 50-year history that we've had with fentanyl being safely used in medicine. And so I am always suspicious when we don't take the time to work it out.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, like, why now is suddenly fentanyl like skyrocketing? If you look at the graphs, it seems to be somewhat of a newer phenomenon that these the deaths are happening and attributed to fentanyl.
Yeah. So one of the things that has been happening in the U.S. illicit opioid market, usually used to be the heroin market, is that heroin has consistently been displaced by fentanyl. Fentanyl, you don't need all of the processing that you would need to make heroin. Fentanyl can be synthesized more readily than you could do heroin. You can take smaller amounts, so that means you don't have to have as bulky of substances to conceal, to smuggle in. And you can still charge the same amount or higher. And so fentanyl has displaced heroin for those reasons I just said. And so the U.S. heroin market it virtually contains no heroin. It contains all fentanyl. And so that's why you're seeing fentanyl. If you look at those same data, heroin is not showing up anymore in terms of the overdose data. You don't see heroin because it's been practically displaced from the market.
My wife is about to give birth pretty soon, and we had a checkup recently, and they said that could give her fentanyl during the birth. And I was the second they said this was a few weeks ago, my eyes lit up, and I actually felt this like visceral reaction of like fear. And it's like this stereotype that's been hammered into me that fentanyl is this horrible thing now, probably from just driving around like inner cities and seeing, people say that these areas have been ravaged by fentanyl, and that's the culprit. So is fentanyl, why has fentanyl become like so demonized?
Well, if you just look at, I don't know when you were born, but since the early 19 teens, we've always had like a drug to vilify. And when you drive around communities, you see people, of course, you don't know what they're taking, but the press and the media has put that in your head. But I will bet you any amount of money right here that the drug that you will see primarily is alcohol. But you don't say alcohol, you're talking about fentanyl. Alcohol is more readily available and more accessible to people. More people do alcohol. And then you see people already struggling. So when you see people already struggling, you just kind of fit in the national narrative the national boogeyman. In this case, it's fentanyl. I assure you, most of those people are not taking fentanyl because they don't even particularly dig opioids. Opioids in general was and has been and currently is always used by select small number of people in the population. And so the places that you describe, typically the sort of Skid Row places, the San Francisco, Portland, all of these places have scapegoated fentanyl for problems that they have not solved, like housing, like employment. I mean, it's like in LA, I think you got more empty places than you have homeless people. And so that's a problem. That's a city problem. That's not a fentanyl problem. The vast majority of these people are not taking fentanyl, but the fentanyl is being blamed for our society's unwillingness to deal with issues that people face. I mean, drugs are so great for scapegoating people. Just like we just had we had a major election in our country, then we're going to see which group gets scapegoated for not supporting whoever. But drugs that's the function of drugs. That's one of the main functions of drugs in our society, scapegoating people. And then I assure you, if your wife is in pain, they give women opioids during birth. And most women appreciate it because of the pain. And so where we're going in our society, we're teaching people that opioids are so dangerous they can't even be used in medicine. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with people? And so that worries me when a society allows itself to be hoodwinked like that out of having access to available therapies that can help them mitigate these ailments like pain.
That was well said. And I really appreciated your book because, like I said, I had that visceral reaction when they said fentanyl, but your book really helped me to reduce the shame and look at my own biases and be like, why am I so afraid of this? It's coming from ignorance, really. Like you said, this has been something that's been used for years. Like if we have a knowledge about it, we don't have to be afraid of it. And I'm wondering, are there common psychological issues or backgrounds that you see between people that tend to get sucked into this addiction rabbit hole? I'm trying to make a psychological connection. What type of childhood or background or psychology makes you susceptible to addiction?
Yeah, that question is one of the reasons that many parents support these sort of draconian drug laws, restrict drug laws, because this is a way where parents can abdicate responsibility in terms of I don't have to parent in this area. Let the government just ban that, and I don't have to parent. And so because of the fear of the question that you asked, when we think about addiction, you have to think about, well, what do we mean? When I talk about addiction, I mean the DSM's definition, that is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, and the International Classification of Disorders definition. They're the same. And the definition basically says that the person has this sort of disruption of functioning, and the person is distressed by the symptoms that cause this disruption in functioning. Now, so when we think about people who have the kind of disruptions in functioning, one of the disruptions is that you spend an increasing amount of time to obtain or use or recover from the substance itself. That's one of the sort of symptoms that people can endorse. Now, if you have a drug that is illegal, now you can't just go to your liquor store and get the drug. So you might have to spend a whole lot of time trying to set up a deal to get what you need so you don't go to jail, whatever. And then if it's illegal, you might want to hide that activity from other people because you don't want them to look at you a certain way. All of these sort of things increase the likelihood that you'll have these disruptions, just the legality of the substance. So you understand that. Now, that means that if you're not highly organized and your life is not, in order, you're going to have an increased likelihood of endorsing these symptoms for addiction just simply because the substance is illegal. That's just one thing. So we can think about people whose lives are erratic, chaotic. Okay, you got an increased likelihood of maybe endorsing those symptoms. Now, you can think about somebody whose life is tightly organized, they are wealthy, they can get what they need. They're going to have less of a chance of endorsing these symptoms. So you can start to understand how and who will meet criteria. Now, that's not to say that wealthy, organized people never become addicted, because some of them do, in part because they just never learned some inhibition skills, some responsibility skills, some other skills they just never learn. But the discourse always goes into the area of, what about their genetics? What about, it's like, are you kidding? There's no evidence for that, but people are constantly looking for it, as well as should in science. But the public likes to go to that refrain, the genetic sort of biological source of this addiction. And there's no good evidence to indicate that there is any unique biological source for addiction. You can simply look at the criteria and the fact that a drug is illegal. And then you can look at people, the same people who are screwing up on the highways, the same people who are screwing up in their life are more likely to meet criteria for addiction for whatever reason, because people screw up because they don't have the skills, they don't have the support, they don't have something. But it's the same sort of thing. It's not unique. Addiction is not unique. They like to tell people things like, anybody can meet criteria for addiction. It's like, really? But theoretically, anybody can meet the criteria for the addiction, but the likelihood it's very low. Every summer in August, there's Burning Man, this big festival. They go out to the desert, and 70, 80,000 people every summer. They go out, do a lot of drugs, sex, have a good time for people. It's great. If that's what people are into, that's mad cool. But you don't hear anybody talking about drug addiction. And trust me, there's a lot of drug use there. That's what it's about. But it's wealthy, organized people who are there because it costs $500 to get in. And then if you're going to bring a vehicle, another $500. And you have to bring a service. You can't just come. You have to bring like a service, a food service or some other service. And so it's the wealthy who go to Burning Man. But you don't hear anybody talking about, you look at those people. I drive around that place and you can see those people having problems. Nobody's saying that because it's the wealthy. It's the people who are the movers and shakers in our society.
But are these people at Burning Man doing fentanyl or meth? I feel like at these festivals, they're mostly doing psychedelics or maybe MDMA. Is that wrong? I haven't been to one in a long time, but.
So MDMA is an amphetamine. So, you look at the MDMA structure, it's an amphetamine. So yes, they're doing meth, they're doing cocaine, they're doing MDMA, they're doing psilocybin, they're doing LSD. There are some opiate use, but not much. Opiate use is not the thing for this group. Like as I pointed out, opiate use has always been kind of reserved for a select small number of people in the United States in terms of use. But they're doing tons of drugs.
Yeah, I bet. Is there any safe way to do the drugs at a festival? Like, or are there any like things that you would really recommend people not do at a festival, like mix certain things or?
If I'm telling you not to do something at a festival, right? And it's already too late. You shouldn't be doing shit. If you hadn't like research, know something about what you're going to do, it's too late. I mean, so I don't really want to waste my time speaking to individuals because it's a joke. When we think about as a society, I'm happy to talk about that. As a society, what we should do is make sure that people have access to these places, programs that can test their substance to make sure that they don't have adulterants or any other potentially harmful substance in their substance that they purchase, like they do in Spain, like they do in the Netherlands, Switzerland, Colombia, all around the globe, except the United States. That's the thing that we should do as a society to enhance the safety of this activity, because the activity is not going away. It's been with us since humans have been roamed the earth. And so that's the main thing. If people are actually taking what they think they're taking, they're fine. Typically, they will be fine. And now people will overdo it. I don't want to talk to those people because that means they haven't read anything, so I'm wasting my time. That's why I write books, to help people to understand that. And also, please understand, all these drugs, we give these drugs in the laboratory and have given them over the course of my 25-plus year career to people and carefully examine their behavior, documenting what happens. And so this lets you know that these drugs aren't so dangerous that humans shouldn't take them. But I don't have to tell you that. Humans know that. That's why they take them. But we have this double message that we send to the society. And that double message serves a variety of purposes in our society.
So in all
What is the purpose?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
So in all your experience of studying in the controlled settings using the pure substances, you've never had any harmful interactions or reactions or deaths or anything?
Never had any deaths. We've had people, for example, have their heart rate or blood pressure might increase to a level where we'd be like, okay, we give another dose when the blood pressure increases that high. And so you hold off on a dose and you just document what happens, watch the participant carefully, and make sure that the blood pressure readings, for example, return to normal baseline levels. So, we've seen things like that, but nothing that was dangerous or unexpected.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the testing. Isn't most of the harm from people getting something that they just don't know what it is? They think it's one thing and it's something else, and that's where they get in trouble?
Yeah, or they take too much of it and they just don't know the dose to take, too much, and unknown substances, that's the culprit of many of these problems.
Yeah, I don't understand why drug dealers or drug creators are putting fentanyl into things like, you hear stories about somebody does something and it actually is laced with fentanyl and that's what kills them. I don't understand why people who create the drugs lace it with something that could kill the user.
Yeah, you don't understand it because it doesn't make any sense, right?
Right.
So it's probably not real. If it doesn't make any sense, that shit probably ain't happening like you just described it. And so I know that's a story that people tell, particularly law enforcement authorities, because it gives them raison d'etre. It gives them a purpose for being. But that's not how reality works. Just think about it. You're a drug dealer and it'd be like, I got cocaine I'm selling. I'm going to spike it with fentanyl. Who does some stupid shit like that? Nobody in this business does anything like that, because it's like your customers, they want cocaine. They don't want an opioid. Why are you going to spike that with opioids? That's just not true. I mean, what can possibly happen is that if people are selling different different drugs, and they somehow the substance touch or somehow store it near each other together, whatever, you might have a faint sort of tainting. but certainly not tainting that will produce any pharmacological effect, like the authorities are saying. That's oftentimes, all right, take a place like Florida. What are the things that law enforcement do? I mean, I had a case recently where this happened. This cat was moving cannabis, selling cannabis, and acknowledges that. But when the police got the cannabis, they tested it, they said, and it contained fentanyl. Now, the weight of that cannabis, a pound or two, now can be considered a pound or two of fentanyl, even though they said it was just, they tested it and it contained some fentanyl, but that could be considered the fentanyl weight, even though clearly that's not the fentanyl weight. And so they are incentivized to do that sort of thing. First of all, nobody is going to be putting fentanyl on cannabis, so I don't even believe that story. And so many of the stories that you hear, if they don't make sense, they probably aren't real. And the police, for example, law enforcement, you might have seen on social media where they touch fentanyl and pass out and they do shit like that. Again, that's staged. That doesn't happen. That can't happen. And so that's how vicious the lies are surrounding drugs in this country, in large part because it is a lot of money in which we're talking about for the police, for scientists, for a number of people in this game to get money to solve the problem. And that's what we always convince Americans of. We did it with terrorism. We do it all the time. We're doing it now with the border. That's not the problem that they've been claiming to be. That's money. That money is being pumped into those law enforcement agencies. So you will hear throughout, as you've been hearing, you got to connect drugs with immigration, with terrorism. You connect all these things, then you're getting money with human trafficking. Now you're getting money from all these pots. That's what this is about. It's about the loot.
So it becomes like an industrial complex. Like the problem is incentivized to be worsened because people make money off the problem being worsened.
Well, the problem is being incentivized to tell you it's worsened. In reality, the reality is something different. But certainly we have to keep telling you that it's worse. You know, that's like with podcasts, with one of the opportunities that podcast has. But the problem is that most of the people who do podcasts, they don't do the work. But the podcast has the opportunity to really displace the sort of traditional media, because the traditional media has and continue to be in bed with law enforcement because they want access for what I don't understand. And so they kind of take the story from law enforcement uncritically without actually critically asking questions about what was said to them. And so podcast has the opportunity to kind of dig in to actually get to truth, as opposed to continuing the spreading of the same hysteria without actually helping people to solve problems.
That's why I'm very grateful that you're on this podcast, and I've seen you on a number of other ones. There's a lot of myths that we need to come to terms with. But the reality is I do drive around certain areas and I see horrific scenes. I mean, it seems like a zombie apocalypse in certain areas. I've been to Skid Row, and my aunt just came to visit. I picked her up near San Francisco, and she wanted to see the Tenderloin. So we went there, and I kind of was like, let me check this out in preparation for this podcast just so I can see with my own eyes some things. And it actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. You know, the media definitely overplays certain things, but it was pretty bad. And I've been hearing about Tranq lately, and I've seen the videos from Kensington, Pennsylvania. I don't even know what Tranq is. What is Tranq?
I think you mean Xylazine. Xylazine. Xylazine is it's used now as it's used in when you to help euthanize animals. So like a few years ago, I had to put my dog down, and one of the drugs that she got was Xylazine. And Xylazine is like a drug called clonidine. It just helps the person to relax. It's like an anti-anxiety medication. It can be used as lowering blood pressure as well. And so there are stories now about how dangerous Xylazine is, and there are stories about you inject Xylazine and you get these sores on your arms and all of these crazy stories about these things.
It does seem like we are seeing some pretty horrific images. It's shocking to think that this isn't happening in America. You know, it looks like a war zone almost. Some of these videos of Kensington where people are completely slumped over. Like, what are we looking at there?
Well, I would suggest you get the fuck out and see more of America, number one. So this is one of the things that's a problem when we get pearl clutchers from around the country don't realize the country in which they live in, because it's like, this is what your government has abdicated. This is nothing new. This has been going on for some time. Just because you just got here yesterday, it doesn't mean it just got here yesterday. That's one. And two, the reason for these problems, don't misattribute them to drugs. I mean, people are having a hard time, particularly after COVID. And then nobody even talks about COVID anymore. They just blame this, just like before. Nobody even talked about things like how people lost their homes, how during the market crash. Nobody even talks about those problems. Never went away. They never went away, and they're still here. That started to happen in as early as the 1980s, early 80s, late 70s, when factories started to close down in the Rust Belt of America, and people who had middle-class lives, good lives, and lost jobs, and the jobs that came back paid far less than what they previously were making. I mean, all of this has been going on for decades. And, now people want to look at a place like Kensington and then blame that like drugs were the problem for that. It blows my mind. I try and tell people, it's like, look, that's why I gave you the Burning Man example, because there's far more drug use in Burning Man than Kensington. But nobody's talking about that. And so you say, I gave drugs every day, 5 days a week to people in the lab every day. Didn't see those kind of problems. No, because those problems are not drugs. Those problems are larger than drugs. But drugs allow us not to deal with those problems. And it is maddening because the people would be like, okay, drugs, narrow your focus. And don't think, just narrow your focus. I mean, it's like going to, a UFC fight or something. And then you see people later, the fighters, and they have some cognitive impairment. And then you don't look at like, well, what were their occupation? I don't know. It's just that they're poor. I think it has something to do with their poverty that they were in, and not look at the blows that they took to the head. That's how we're doing this. It's like, are you kidding? The obvious thing is like, were they employed? Were they using any drugs before they were here? Of course not. Anyway, drugs are an easy way to not deal with a society's problems. And then in the U.S., we don't deal with the problems of society, particularly if we don't see those people as our children, our brothers, our sisters. Then it's like we just say, screw those people.
Well said. Have you heard of Dr. Gabor Mate?
Yeah.
Yeah, he has
Gabar.
Oh, you know him? He has a really great theory that resonates with a lot of people about childhood trauma leading to addiction, because we have two needs when we're born. We need to attach and we need to be authentic. And the people who are traumatized a lot have to suppress their authenticity in order to stay attached to abusive adults or in a situation that's not ideal. So this trauma builds up, and later in life they need to chase this feeling of attachment through drugs, and they're more prone to addiction. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that idea.
You know, I love Gabar. He's a deeply human person, and he's really encouraging us to be more humane, and we need more people like that in our world. I mean, just particularly in the public. I am really impressed with his humanity. When we think about this theory of trauma and drug addiction, I am less impressed with that kind of thing to explain drug. Certainly, there are people that have trauma, and this trauma that hasn't been resolved can lead to disruptive behaviors, including drug addiction, including other sort of disruptive behaviors. So, yeah, absolutely, there are people for whom that applies. But, one shoe fits all, like for drug addiction, is short-sighted. It doesn't work like that, because if you look at the symptoms, there are 11 symptoms, and then people can endorse any combination of those symptoms. And so when you think about, like, this is going to explain all of these symptoms, it doesn't work that way, but that's okay. You don't need to have a grand theory to explain it all. His main point is that trauma is an important feature that we need to pay attention to, because if we don't correct a trauma, then people will have problems in life in general. Absolutely agree with that. Now, just in terms of drug addiction, people express drug addictions for a variety of reasons. You can imagine the person who, I think about just being a writer and people who write. People might take amphetamines to write and be really productive, and then they really get into the amphetamine use. And then it's like, oh, yeah, okay, so I got to sleep. Take some sedative to go to sleep. And then this cycle is working, and you are doing really well. And so you can see how people can get in trouble by doing this cycle, that they're being productive. Particularly in this society, we reward productivity. And so people sometimes get in trouble that way. They express addiction that way. Other people just haven't had any sort of practice ability to inhibit their behavior as well as they need in certain situations, or things come up like a loved one died. It's like I buried my father last week. All of these things that increase the likelihood that people might have some problems. And the problem might be temporary, it might be long-term, but people are addicted for a variety of reasons. And the most important thing when it comes to addiction for the therapist, for the person who's treating them, is to first do a comprehensive assessment. And then so you can see what symptoms the person is endorsing, you can see what's going on in the person's entire life. And then if you can figure that out, then maybe you can intervene to help disrupt the problem that the person sees, to help disrupt the person's pain.
I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I'm curious to know, should we just legalize everything?
Well, people aren't seeking everything, and it's not a strategy that a society who claims to be data-driven should take. I think that, when we think about the recreational drugs that people take, we're in the process of legalizing one, cannabis, right? All of these things that we are saying about fentanyl and so forth, we said about cannabis beginning in the 1930s, and we told all similar lies. And now we're on the verge of legalizing cannabis. But the society doesn't seem to make the connection that, wait, if we lied about cannabis, can we be lying about some of these other things? The society just doesn't seem to be able to put those two things together. So we're in the process of legalizing one drug that many people take, cannabis. So we can just legalize maybe 5 or so compounds, one from the major classes that people take, and figure out routes of administration, unit dose that we'll make available, all of these things that will enhance the safety of these things. Like with alcohol, you can put enough alcohol in a bottle to kill somebody, but we don't. We put enough in that people can be psychoactively altered, and we've learned a lot about that sort of thing. And so we have to use our knowledge of pharmacology and history, all of these things to decide how to do this. But to legalize everything, I don't think that's a smart strategy.
So I guess what should remain illegal?
Well, I think so. Like we should have certainly a stimulant like cocaine, and some people might want a longer acting stimulant like amphetamines. We can decide which amphetamine, which cocaine, and what form we'll make legal, what unit dose. An opioid, something like morphine or heroin that is not too potent, and that and we can decide what form we can make it available, legally available. We can even decide whether or not people will have to meet a requirement before they can receive, let's say, a license to purchase that, like a driver's license. That requirement must be met before you can drive. So we can do those sort of things. Then we can see which psychedelics we make available, which combination. So just go from drug classes and decide. And then say, like, there are compounds that are not legal and people want, then we can reevaluate and see if those compounds should be available, and based on the evidence.
One of my concerns is that the forces that drive the market in this capitalist society we live in, it seems like the best customer is one that keeps coming back. You want to create basically an addict. If you look at our food, it's gotten more salty, more sugary. It leans towards addictive behavior. My fear is that if large companies get involved, we might have the same thing happen with food happen to, they're going to create the most addictive, they're going to create their customer, and they're going to create the perfect customer, Are you worried about that at all?
Yeah, but not enough to not remember that I live in a capitalistic society. And then, so we have corporations who are in business to make money, and we encourage that in a capitalistic society. So one of the things about our society is that we think we can have it both ways. We talk out of both sides of our mouth, and if we're going to keep being in a capitalistic society, that's one of the risks that you deal with in a capitalistic society. And so you try and have regulations to make sure, for example, the food industry put the ingredients in their compound, in their food, so the consumer can be informed about what the choices that they're making, or they have the potential to be informed, that because it's the company's responsibility. The same is true here. You just want to make sure that the manufacturer gives the consumer all the information that they have. That's what you can do in a capitalistic society. I mean, you can't get around the fact that, yeah, you're right, some people are going to overdo it. You're absolutely right. Every year on our highways in the United States, we lose 40,000 Americans every year. But we're not talking about banning cars, are we? And so we try to make that activity safer. Like lower the speed limit. We implement seatbelt regulations. We do all of these things to try to make the activity safer while not banning the activity. And that's the same thing that's true here. When we think about the beginning of the country, the founding forefathers, they were trying to get away from this sort of puritanical way of being. And so they wanted to be able to live their life in a way that they saw fit without the government impinging. But of course, the government has an important role to make sure that we have a safety net for people too. That's the balance that we play. And so, I share your concern about people. And so I will do my part in terms of helping to educate the population about how to do these things more safely and helping to inform the government about which regulations make sense and which don't. But the activity should still be available.
Well, I think you're doing a great job of lifting the veil and educating people, because there's a lot of fear on these issues, but it stems from ignorance. Are you encountering a lot of backlash?
I don't think I encountered personally, but maybe, there are people who have, for example, tried to dismiss what I say without any evidence. And so that's backlash to me. And that's the more upsetting than anything, that people can be in this conversation without not having read anything, without knowing any data, but yet be taken seriously. And so, that's the kind of backlash that really upsets me as an educator, as a scientist, as someone who deals in the currency of data. And so, that's it's that part of it is it's sad. But when I go out on the road and I give lectures, and then young people who are hungry, intellectually curious, and that's the thing that gives me hope, because people are they want to struggle with the ideas and the data, and it's that's what it's all about, and they want truth, and that's so I'm hoping that truth becomes popular again.
So are you optimistic about the future?
I have to be, man. That's why we do drugs, to be optimistic about the future. If I wasn't, optimistic, then you can't do the work, because it's so hard, digging into the data, like the overdose data. When you just take what people say, you become a prisoner to their misinformation. And so you have to go in and do the work. And it's hard to always take it apart, the lies. I feel like people just are allowed to sling garbage on the wall, and my job is to go clean off the wall, and they have so much garbage to throw on the wall. And so that's hard. And to do that hard work, one has to be optimistic, and I am optimistic. I'm optimistic that, the truth will ultimately be here, whether I'm here or not. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I tell the truth as I see it, and not be discouraged, because there are people who don't deserve to have me be discouraged. Just because I had a bad day doesn't mean that they should have a bad day. So I have to be optimistic for them.
That's a great philosophy. Another thing I appreciate about your research is that you're very you're hands-on, and you want to experience it yourself firsthand in terms of trying the drug yourself. Are there any drugs out there that we don't know about that you think could really help people, or lesser known drugs?
Let's take a step back. So please understand, when I started this in my career, I was afraid of drugs just like everybody else. And then, coming into the lab every day, getting people high with all of these substances, and then people having a good time. I'm looking at the data and I'm like, what the fuck am I thinking? You know, I haven't tried this kind of thing. And then so that, of course, piqued my curiosity even more. And so knowing the doses, knowing all this information, it's like, wow, I've been missing this. And then to share it with my loved ones and so forth, it's a beautiful thing. And so that's from the years of research and really doing the work and understanding what I'm doing. Now, your question about substances that may be out here that people don't know, I think people know the major substances. I'll just like, one of my favorite is a drug called 6-APB. That drug is very much like MDMA. And so I don't really talk much about it because people are getting what they need or that kind of experience from MDMA. 6-APB is longer lasting, might be a little more sort of less overwhelming, like MDMA can be at certain doses. And so I think that's an interesting compound, but I don't really talk much about it because, as I said, you can pretty much get the same experience with MDMA. And yeah, that's about the only one that many people don't know that I care to even mention. But really, there are only a handful of compounds that people seek, and rightfully so. There are people who just want to experience everything and so many, and that's cool if that's what they want. But really, it's only a handful of compounds that are that most people are interested in.
What are the handful?
Oh, classic: cocaine, amphetamine, opioids like heroin, the psychedelics, some like psilocybin, DMT, LSD, cannabis got to be up there. So I mean, those kind of classics, they're all there. Those are the classics that people seek, and rightfully so.
And you're kind of well known for using heroin yourself, right?
Yeah. I become well known because I say, yeah, of course I use heroin, but I use all the rest of these drugs too. But people focus on heroin in part because it's a way, at least people try, to dismiss you. Like they say, you inject heroin. I never injected heroin. I mean, there's no need to inject heroin but this is a myth that people have. So if you have real heroin, you don't need to inject it. I mean, if people want to, that's fine, but most people don't. And you don't need to take heroin every day. Again, like this sort of mythology that people have about the compound. And so I become the kind of face of heroin use. And it's like, it's one of these things where I'm not as comfortable with that. Not because I don't give a fuck what people think in that regard, but just simply because I think that there are people who know more about this than I do, and so it's like, I don't want to be like I'm the person who knows all about heroin and that's the drug. But it comes with the territory, and I won't shy away from it. Of course, yeah, heroin is for me a outstanding drug, just like MDMA.
Well, I think it took a lot of courage for you to come out and say that, because there is such a strong stigma around it. But then now we see you and you're like a high functioning university professor, author, speaker, father. So you're kind of breaking a lot of the stereotypes. So I think, if more people that were like high functioning, well adjusted, contributing members of society started saying, yeah, I use it too. Like, is it because of this stigma that a lot of people that do use these things are afraid to come out and say it?
Yeah, it's been since the release of drug use for grown-ups. I mean, I was so optimistic about the future, about where we were going as a country in terms of our compassion and that sort of thing. Because in writing Drug Use for Grown Up, I went around the world and kind of wrote about the experience with all of these people, these high functioning, these players of industry, and thinking that they would all come out of the closet too, and because they see the vilification of the people like on Skid Row, the people who can't defend themselves. They see that kind of vilification of this unfair vilification of these people. And so we put ourselves out in the line and say, hey, hold up, it's not the drugs because I use drugs. It's these other things. But the people haven't gotten out of the closet as they promised. And so that has been disappointing because I know, lots of folks who do drugs, all of these drugs, and are doing well, raised families, they are in careers, they are respected members of our society. In some cases, they know more about these things than I do, and they're in the closet. Or they have taken the tepid, cowardly step to say, hey, I do psychedelics because psychedelics is in fashion. But they don't say anything else. And so that's been disappointing, disheartening a little, and heartbreaking. But in order to have one's heart broken, one has to be full of hope and promise. And I hope to get my heart broken more. And because it says that I'm still here in the game, I still have hope for humanity, for society. So I'll probably have many more heartbreaks.
Yeah. So drug use for grown-ups was about 4 years ago. Have we made progress since then, or are you more encouraged now?
No, actually, I'm less encouraged because I've seen this sort of shift over this kind of sidestep to say some psychedelics are okay. The rest of those things we can continue to punish harshly. And the folks who identify as psychedelic use, they've been silent on the punishment that's being melded out to these people who use other drugs. And so that's the thing that's been heartbreaking, and that's been disappointing to observe the silence on that, or on the injustice that is happening towards people who use drugs other than so-called psychedelics.
It seems like it's just a slow march, though. It's like we got to take one thing at a time. Like I'm working right now with the organization MAPS, and they're fighting this huge uphill battle. They were just trying to get MDMA approved by the FDA.
I don't know if you know, but I was on the MAPS board.
Oh, were you? Oh,
I
great!
Resigned
they just hired me to create their holiday card.
Yeah,
I'm an artist, so they
I didn't know that.
So I have another channel after school where I animate. I've talked about psychedelics quite a bit on that channel. I've never talked about any other drug really besides like mushrooms and LSD, but through that I've been connected to MAPS, and they asked me to make an illustration for their holiday card. So that's what I'm about to work on. But yeah, I'm a fan of MAPS, but it seems like they have quite a uphill battle to fight.
Yeah, my heartbreak, my disappointment, my sort of interaction at the time with Matt, that's part of the heartbreak. Those are the folks that I'm talking about for the most part. So good luck. And I mean, we'll see how it shakes out.
So your heart breaks because those people there have sympathy for certain types of drug users, but
absolutely
none for okay.
Yeah.
Is that kind of, it's hypocritical in your view?
Yeah, it is hypocritical, but hypocrisy is always justified. And the justification is kind of like that story you were getting ready to talk about, the slow march, one thing at a time. We have to be strategic and all this bullshit. That's what that really is. It's like, I'm not a politician, don't care to be a politician. But what I know is that I have to advocate for what's right. And that's kind of the spirit of MAPS when MAPS got started, when Rick Doblin started MAP. That was the spirit, and I believe that's still Rick's spirit. That it's like, hey, we're a drug policy organization first. That's what we do. And then the financiers came in and they wanted to push a compound, and they know nothing about the history of drug policy. They don't give a fuck about drug policy or the people who are deleteriously affected with the current drug policy. They don't care. That's not, and so we brought corporate America in, and corporate America doesn't really care about America. And so that's a decision, a choice, a direction that the organization decided to go to, and that's cool. That's why I bounced. So,
yeah, I mean, from the outside, because I'm not super involved with them, I'm just doing their holiday card. But from the outside, it seems like they are trying to do this steady march and knock down each thing that they think they can get a victory on. So, like, cannabis is something like nobody's ever really died from it. It seems pretty harmless. It seems to have a lot of health benefits. So let's tackle that one first. Then, then they went to mushrooms. Nobody's overdosed on it. It's not addictive.
Wait, I don't know. What do you mean they did cannabis?
Or maybe not MAPS, but in terms of like legalization of drugs.
Yeah,
it seems like
it doesn't
cannabis
work.
Did I have that wrong?
Work like that. No, I've been in the drug policy field for a long time. The fact is, you think about, we have to go back to the 1970s. Like, there was a movement to decriminalize cannabis in the 1970s when middle-class white folks saw their kids coming out of the 60s, college young people, being arrested for cannabis law, and facing some serious times. And so those middle-class white parents pushed their politicians. Like in New York, for example, we decriminalized cannabis in 1977, basically because of these sort of middle-class white parents. So cannabis was, you have a large number of people who use cannabis. And then when you have a large number of people who use a substance, it's harder to vilify that substance. Like in 1937, when it became illegal, wasn't as many people using cannabis. And so as more people use the substance, it becomes more difficult to vilify. And so it was just low-hanging fruit as you move forward in terms of, because then you had the medical marijuana thing where the government actually legalized marijuana for medicine, like in 1978, in a small program. So you have this kind of hypocrisy, this inconsistency that you can point to too. So there were a lot of sort of factors that went into this, and a lot of organizations on the ground pushing for this. And nobody would say that cannabis is harmless, because that's not true. I mean, psychoactive substances are not harmless. They carry potential risk, but the risk had been exaggerated. That's the sort of major push. And not only that, cannabis was the major reason people were being arrested for drugs. And so all of these things kind of came together to but the most important thing that came together is that business people found out that they can make money with this. And when the business interest came, it becomes that helps. And so that's one of the reasons that MAPS is now pushing MDMA, because business interest is interested in MDMA as a medicine. And so all of these forces work together to help focus whatever people are going to push. But my interest, as somebody who's been interested in human rights, is that shouldn't be arresting anybody for what they choose to put in their body. I mean, we should just be consistent with the Declaration of Independence, with this sort of plan of our society that we set. People have the right to live their life as they decide.
I 100% agree on that. Freedom over consciousness. I feel like there's been a war on consciousness, and if you do no harm to anybody else, you should be totally free to explore your consciousness in any way you see fit. They justify that and say that people that do drugs do other things like crime or murder or these things, but to me, those other things are illegal. So if you do drugs that don't do anything illegal, it should be fine. I feel like we should release every single nonviolent person in jail that's in there for a drug offense. They should be released today and immediately. And it's a tragedy that there's been people in jail for decades over like having a joint. I hear these horror stories. It's insane. I'm curious to know how we should talk to children about drugs. How do you recommend we do that?
How do we talk to children about sex, about anything? Let's take a step back. So we've been collecting data in the U.S. for more than 50 years about what drugs 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders use. And the three drugs that they use, tobacco or nicotine, alcohol, and cannabis. Those are the three drugs that you should focus your education on with children. Today, the opioids are popular. Children aren't using opioids, but your government will have you believe that nonsense or have you focus on children with opioids. That would be a waste of time. And so you help children to understand, for example, signs of overuse of these things. Like if people have asthma, like I live in New York City, my kids, they all had asthma, and so it's like, okay, if you're sucking burning weeds down your throat and you have an asthma attack, what do you do? Those kind of things are the things that we talk about. Alcohol poisoning. Always worry about that with inexperienced drinkers. Don't overdo it. Help them to recognize the signs of overdoing it. These are the kind of things that parents can talk about their children with drugs, and they don't need to have this super amount of knowledge about drugs. Those are the three. That's it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think it's all about education, but for most parents, it's hard to really get educated on this, and it's much easier to just say, hey, don't do that, and then scare them into, I remember my own dad, he printed out this horrific series of pictures of a pretty young girl who got arrested when she was like 20 for some drug. I think it was meth. And over the course of a decade, the last picture in the series is horrific. And, that was put on my wall and meant to scare me. And it worked. It really worked. And so unfortunately, scare tactics do work, but they probably, sometimes that creates more curiosity. Like if you try to restrict something, it's natural human nature to want to check it out. So it can backfire.
Parents have their own style and their own sort of views on parenting, and that's absolutely fine. And they will be responsible for that child, and so they can make their decisions. I think about just in terms of what we tell a society larger. The larger thing that the message the government should say is like, students use primarily these three drugs. I mean, that's why we do these surveys every year. And so that's where the education, if there is any, should focus only on those three drugs and not get crazy about it, just like we don't get crazy about sex education. We just deal with it. When it comes up, you deal with it.
I'm curious to get your opinion on dopamine and ADHD. Dr. Andrew Huberman, I listen to him quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he talks about there's this rise in ADHD, particularly young boys, but most kids, because they're overstimulated. They're doing things that kind of rob them of dopamine or overstimulate them. The food, the video games, the social media. And so they're dopamine depleted. And in order to level themselves out, they need those Adderall, Ritalin, just to pay attention. And his theory is if you remove all these overstimulating things, the social media and the sugary foods, then the kid can now pay attention. Have you looked into these ideas? Like, what do you think about that philosophy?
Fraud.
Really?
That's the word that comes to mind. Whenever anybody is distilling down a complex behavior to a single neurotransmitter, you can stop listening. Dopamine represents less than 1% of the brain neurotransmitters. And you're talking about what you just described as some complex human behaviors. Like people narrowed down drug addiction to dopamine back in the 1980s. And so that's like my brain education happened then. I studied Parkinson's disease, which is a dopamine depletion disease. And so I know dopamine really well. So I recognize frauds easily with dopamine. Now, there is no reason to even talk about dopamine when you describe what you just described. If we have kids who are not doing well, and then you have all of these things, sugar or whatever, all of these things you just described, why not just look at their behavior and then see where the interventions need to be? This idea of using dopamine, which you can't measure in a human, in a human living human brain, it just distracts and it pretends to be smart when it's stupid. And so that's the thing that like really upsets me, because people are manipulating the public into thinking that they actually had some explanatory power with their explanation, and it has no explanatory power. Because you'd be like, this is a really simple thing to deal with. You can be like, yo, did you measure dopamine in these kids? And then so you consistently see this depleted level. If people have a dopamine depletion, they won't be able to move. They would have Parkinson's disease. That's what Parkinson's disease is really about. And so it upsets me. You know, there is an issue that we worry about in the country in general. We worry that kids are being placed on attention deficit disorder medications, methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, amphetamines, Adderall. We worry about them being placed on these medications at increasingly younger ages. I think the average age now is like 6 they're being placed. And so people are worried about that, as well they should. And so I think that's a legitimate concern, and we should look into certainly behavioral therapies have been shown to be really effective in dealing with people with ADHD. And so I like the idea of saying, hey, let's just make sure we're careful about what we're doing with the medications, and particularly in these younger people. I agree with that. But this dopamine babble bullshit, come on, man. That's like, that just makes people pretend. That makes the listener and the person think that they're smarter than they are. And it's like, there's no need for it. Because it's wrong. First of all, it's wrong, and you can't even measure that. And then it's like, what the fuck are you doing?
Huh. Maybe I'm not articulating Andrew Huberman's
I think you
point.
are. If you talk about a dopamine depletion, that's kind of simple. There is no reason to be talking about dopamine and ADHD. The major theory with ADHD is that somehow these kids have a dysregulation of their monoamine transporter in the prefrontal cortex. Now, dopamine is a monoamine neurotransmitter. So too is norepinephrine, so too is serotonin. And so the theory is not specific to any of those transmitters. It's just that the monoamine transmitter. So it could be all of them or any of them. And that's a theory. No evidence to support that theory. Just the theory. And now you're like taking that theory even further and saying dopamine depletion it just blows my mind. It's like, first of all, there is no evidence in the brains of people with ADHD that there is dysregulation dysfunction. But the major theory is this deficit in functioning of the monoamine transporter. But it's only a theory. And so you give medications, say like these medications target the transporter. And so therefore they get better, therefore it works. That's not evidence of it that it works.
I guess taking dopamine out of it for now, because I'm not, on your level of knowing neuroscience, but just taking dopamine out of it for a second. I think the idea is that people are surrounded by so much stimulus now that things that used to interest them no longer interest them because they're overstimulated. So like it's very hard to pay attention to like a dry lecture because they've got video games and they've got sugar, they've got cookies, they've got all these things. So it raises that threshold of what can capture their interest. And so like something like dopamine fasting, you are lowering that threshold by getting rid of the candy and the sugar and the things that, speak to that dopamine. You are, so like that lecture. So if you eat ice cream all the time, a blueberry is not going to taste very good. But if you take away all that stimulus and you eat very bland food, all of a sudden a blueberry is going to like blow your mind. You see what I'm saying? Like if you take away
contrast, I get it. No, yeah. I get the contrast.
So does that idea make any? So I think what's happening is kids that are overstimulated are getting prescribed these medications when really what could be done instead of medicating them is just take away all that stimulus and then they can suddenly pay attention to things. Is that wrong?
So throughout history, there have been kids who've been bored in lectures, including me. And so that's just a problem that we have in general. But nobody was diagnosing me because, we were poor and we weren't going to see the psychologist or anybody. And so that's why we look at like, are we increasing our sort of diagnosis of this disorder because we're looking, whereas before we weren't looking? I mean, all of these questions have to be teased out first. You got to figure that out. Is this a real thing, or is it one of these things that because we're looking, we're finding it? That's one thing. And then we think about this overstimulation. That's right. Kids have access to things today that we didn't have access to then. But also the teacher has access to the electronics in their lectures that we didn't have access to in our time. So the lectures also have improved and is moving with the time, just like the kids are. So the fact that people are bored in lectures, well, welcome to life. I mean, that's just how some teachers are better at doing this thing than others. That's just life. I mean, that's anything. And sometimes you have to listen to some boring shit. That's life. And so, even if we sympathize with the kids and say like, I get it. But sometimes we have to do things that are difficult, boring, whatever. That's what this thing, life is all about. But we're not gonna over pathologize the kids because they don't want to do it. But they have to understand that, okay, you have to do it in some cases. It's always this sort of give and take and this balance that you have to take. My frustration is when these frauds throw out terms like dopamine to lend credibility to their argument, which it doesn't. When you really just ask a simple question, hey, has anybody measured dopamine in these people? Just ask that simple question. This shit falls apart. Because no, why are you going to dopamine? Why didn't you talk about GABA? GABA is far more plentiful than dopamine. Why didn't you talk about glutamate? Glutamate is far more plentiful than dopamine. why didn't you talk about the co-localization of dopamine with some peptide or something? So now you expose the fraud. But the thing is, the public is now, we've had dopamine, a band called dopamine. It's a popular term. And so people pretend that they know what they're talking about. I can't stand frauds like that because, the idea is to simplify information, not make it complicated so you seem smart. And so whenever I see that kind of thing, then I know I have a fraud that I'm dealing with.
Have you ever debated this? I would love to see you go on Andrew Huberman's podcast and discuss this.
This person would not have me on his podcast with this bullshit. I mean, because
You
I
think?
would expose. I'm absolutely sure. I mean, this is like, I know this person has never reached out to me. I mean, this is like, particularly if you're talking about dopamine, this is my area. I mean, I was, this is, and then if you're telling the public this nonsense, come on.
Huh. Well, it doesn't have to be Andrew Huberman, but there are a number of doctors that, like I'm friends with Dr. Anna Lemke, who wrote Dopamine Nation.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've read that book, but it makes a great argument. And you're right, it does make you sound smart when you talk about dopamine. And, according to these books, they do have ways of measuring dopamine, and they cite things
they
like...
don't. That's a lie.
They don't.
It's an absolute lie. I mean, I know this better than anybody this part. This is what I do. You can't measure dopamine in the human brain. There's no direct measurement of dopamine in the human brain. You can't do that.
I had no idea. But,
Yeah.
they have these, like they talk about ice baths a lot. And they say that if you go in an ice bath for a certain number of minutes, you'll have a prolonged elevated dopamine level afterwards. So is that completely wrong science?
This is the first time I heard this. It just blows my mind. Okay, like one of the things that happen when you get stressed out, angry, whatever, your dopamine levels increase. Pleasure, dopamine levels increase. It increases in response to a wide range of stimuli. So if you get in an ice bath, it might be because of the stress response. It might increase. But a lot of other things also are increasing. Cortisol, norepinephrine, a wide range of other things. Why are you picking out dopamine? So we asked them, why dopamine? What's special about dopamine? And I don't know what they'll say, but that's the thing to ask. Why dopamine?
Yeah, it's gotten quite popular. I mean, if you put out a video that has dopamine in the title, it gets a lot of views. Yeah.
Yep.
I wish I was smart enough to make better points here, because what you're presenting is blowing my mind here. It's completely new information where it took me a long time just to understand Andrew Huberman's ideas. I'm still trying to understand those, and now that is falling down like a house of cards, you're saying.
Yeah, it's very sad because, like the podcast world, I have so much hope for it because it can be one of these places to challenge traditional media and go in depth to some of these things. But this seems to be doing worse than traditional media.
Do you think it's doing harm? Because, I'm seeing a lot of people doing ice baths and working out, and they're saying, oh, my dopamine is going to be elevated after I do this. Or, I mean, it seems like these people are living pretty healthy lives. I don't know. I mean, it seems to be serving them.
I don't know, like, for example, the National Football League, the NFL, those guys, they know how to take care of their bodies. And so if they take ice bath after a bruising game to help recover, it might be something to that recovery. But I assure you, it has nothing to do with dopamine in the brain. That's nothing. That has nothing to do with dopamine. Now, when people are doing this, I don't think they're hurting themselves. I don't see why they would hurt themselves. But they will look and sound ignorant if they talk about, I'm doing this to increase my dopamine, to anybody who knows anything. It's like, what the fuck? What?
So dopamine itself does not increase or decrease no matter what you do. Is that?
Oh, dopamine activity increases, like I said, in response to a lot of stimuli, like stress. When I'm stressed out, dopamine levels increase. Pleasure, dopamine levels increase. Plays some role in terms of learning, helping to direct your attention. It plays some role, but I don't know why anybody would selectively pull out dopamine for some activity when we don't know what combination of activity, of dopamine's activity along with other neurotransmitters activity produces a behavior, is really the sort of driver of a behavior. I don't know that. We don't know that.
So if somebody is extremely depressed, are they lacking any sort of neurotransmitter or chemical in their brain that we can give them something that will level it out? Or
no, there is no evidence to support that. The pharmaceutical companies perpetuated this myth, and it worked because everybody thinks, oh, I'm depressed, I have a chemical imbalance. No evidence of a chemical imbalance. That's just the nonsense. But people believe it. The pharmaceutical companies, they won. With Prozac, 1987, when they marketed Prozac, it was all about people having an imbalance in serotonin, and that's the sort of story that continues to be pushed. But there's no evidence for that story.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I actually did a very big video on that whole topic about a year ago about how the whole myth of serotonin imbalances leading to depression that's a myth. So yeah, I agree with you there 100%.
Well, don't agree with me, man. The evidence, it's not me. That this is the problem with these things. It's not, all I said was that there is no evidence to support that myth. That's it. It's not my position. It's just the evidence. And this is the problem when I hear these people out here. It becomes like their theory. It's like, where did you publish this bullshit? If you didn't publish it, it ain't a theory.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you working on these days?
Being happy. That's what I'm working on, being happy. I'm working on making sure my kids are flying in the world, yeah, that's the main thing.
Right. Are you conducting any studies right now?
No, not anything that I care to talk about. No, I am really trying to be a better writer. That's what I'm really trying to do. I'm trying to figure out how to communicate better with the public in a way that keeps those kids who are bored by these lectures. I'm trying to reach those kids.
Good. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your insight here, and I would love to see you debate somebody that's much smarter than me on it, because I'm just the consumer of podcasts, and
set it up.
I do kind of know Andrew Huberman, so maybe I could try to facilitate that interaction. I know he's pretty open to talking about having controversial conversations, so I think that could be huge. Because
all right, I would bet that he wouldn't talk to me.
He would not?
Nah, because why would you have somebody expose you? It's like, I don't know how well he's doing. I don't know anything about it. But if, let's just say he's doing well and he's got an audience, why mess up his flow, his loop,
Well,
so I would bet that he would.
He has a lot of critics. He does have critics, and I know he has had them on in the past that challenge him. He's pretty open to it, and he's just a very good science communicator. And what he does is he takes like 40 studies on the topic that he's talking about, and he'll go through like each study, and he'll use language that we can understand? Like, because how many of us are actually going to dive into that study? And I don't even know how to read these things, you know? But
Yeah. See, but that would be like, a thing to do. Just what you just said. I don't even know how to read these things. To teach people how to read them. Just take one, like really good paper, one that's popular but not good, and just go through it, and you teach people how to read, and you teach people the key buzzwords and the words that mean nothing, the words that are to mislead you. I mean, that's the key. Not me telling you this, but teaching you how to do this. That's the key.
I think people gravitate so strongly towards his messages because it kind of gives you the power over your own life. You know, like, um, I'm curious to know, like, what tools do you have in your arsenal to keep yourself happy and be productive and feel good?
What tools I have?
Yeah, like, do you work out every morning or do you drink a lot of water,
Oh,
things like that?
you know, I've been writing, so I haven't worked out as much as I normally do, but I usually work out at least 3 times a week or something like that. And yeah, my wife and I, vegetarians, and we don't, always have been for the most part. We eat simply, we live simply, we don't have a lot of stuff. What else? We I don't know, just try and be simple people. And knowledge, education keeps me healthy. I mean, because you can see the bullshit. Because, when you've been here, damn near 60 years, you can see the bullshit coming. And so your bullshit detector is pretty good, like this dopamine bullshit. So I don't have to spend time on this nonsense. And I know that going into situations, I have a brain that I can meet each situation anew and not have some program. Like many people just have a program because they can't think, or don't have the confidence to think in new situations. And so for me, that's the key. Just keep practicing reading. Reading is so good to keep you thinking.
Well, I love the energy and the fire and the passion you have for this subject, and I appreciate your frustration on it. I would love to see this conversation because I'm not qualified to even. I'm just like bringing up the idea that I came across.
And thank you for introducing me to the idea, because I didn't even know it. I don't even know it. Yeah.
Yeah, I try not to get attached to any idea or person or philosophy. I like to entertain ideas, but I don't get attached to them, as Aristotle would say. Last question.
Well, please. Yeah.
Oh,
please. No, go ahead, please.
Kind of controversial, pretty controversial. We have a new thing happening where people are opting to self-delete themselves. They can take a pill, I guess, and end their life. And it started off for people that were kind of on their deathbed and they could just choose to end it all. But now we're seeing young people who are just depressed. I think there's been some cases in Canada where people are like, I just don't want to live anymore. I'm curious to get your opinion on like what's happening here, where people just don't want to live anymore and they take this pill and they can end it.
First of all, I would suggest that you actually look at the data and see if this is really happening or if this is just some nonsense that people are saying. I'm sure maybe I know there are kids who have committed suicide. I know that happens. And that, so the question becomes, is this a phenomena that's increasing above the low normal rate of suicide? That's what I would want to know. Like, where is this happening? Because I know also suicide tends to happen in pockets and sort of like a social contagion. And so is this happening in a select region of the country, the world? And so I have to ask all of these questions before I can even know or answer this, because I don't know the extent to which this is a real phenomena or something that the people are exaggerating. I don't know. I never heard this.
So these are, I'm just Googling it right now. These are called MAID deaths. And in Canada, I know it's a big thing in Canada. In 2022, there were 13,241 MAID deaths. And that was a 31.
Wait, 13,000 deaths?
Yeah, from assisted self-deletion.
Wait, these are kids?
No,
13,000?
these are not kids. These are people who choose to. They say they want to end it. Let me get a better definition of this. There have been a total of 44,958 MAID deaths. You haven't heard of this?
No.
Yeah.
Even as you read it, I'm starting to think that they're just classifying everything in this category. I will have to check it out, but I don't want to comment on this because I don't want to participate in spreading rumors that this is a phenomena that's not carefully defined and they're just throwing cases in here. That would be irresponsible.
Yeah, I mean, my bad. I was a little bit irresponsible, and I should have had a better definition, and I should know more about this before asking you about it. I just was curious to get your opinion on it. But yeah, we can certainly not talk about it.
Yeah, because I don't want to participate in spreading of something that's not real or some other phenomena is going on, and I'm ignorant about it, and I am ignorant about it. I don't want to do that. We got enough people doing that out there.
Well, I appreciate that because there's a lot of opinions. People seem to have an opinion about everything, and there's far more opinions than people doing actual research.
Yeah, that's the problem, and that's the problem that the people in Skid Row and all of these places, they pay the consequences of what you just said. All of these people with opinions and don't know the subject, and all of the fighting and argument means that those people continue to suffer.
Gotcha. Well, are you? We had a big election last night. How are you feeling about it?
I'm depressed. I mean, it's not that I thought that Kamala Harris was so great or anything like that, but I'm just horrified at the number of people who endorse this Trump meanness and pettiness that people have in the public. And so, but, it's always a lesson there. And I don't know what it is yet, but so it seems as though the guy was so mean and so willing to disparage people that I thought that people weren't feeling that, but I don't know. Maybe it was something else that they're feeling. Maybe it's a fuck you to the establishment, and I get that. I mean, I certainly understand the need or the want to say fuck you to the establishment. I'm with that. I get that, but our sort of meanness, it's troubling to me.
Yeah, typically I never talk about politics. I avoid it. I never come down on one side or the other usually. But it happened last night, so it's hard to not even think about it. It's been the mood of the whole morning. I just went to the gym and every single person I saw wanted to talk about it. So
yeah, we're gonna be fine. It's gonna be fine. But you deal. But I just hope that we just not so mean to each other.
I 100% agree with you. I'm optimistic. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I really appreciate your time here. I won't take up any more of it. I'm amazed that you said yes to doing this, considering you didn't even know what my main YouTube channel was.
Yeah, it's okay. You came at me correctly, and I appreciate you. So thank you. And it's good to talk to people too, because particularly curious people. And this is your world. This is going to be your world. So treat people well. That's it.
Yeah. I really appreciate your book. I mean, I had some firmly held beliefs that I had to really reevaluate after reading it. So I'm very grateful for that. You've helped me not be so afraid of certain things that I was ignorant on. And yeah, I look forward to meeting you in person. And maybe if I could facilitate this conversation with Andrew Huberman, I think that would be huge.
I'm down. I'm down. More importantly, man, you got a child coming, so you're a good parent. That's more important.
That's more important.